The news of Officer James Walker's death hit the town like a thunderclap. One moment, he was out on patrol, ensuring the streets were safe for everyone, and the next, he was gone. It wasn't just the end of a career. It was the sudden, heartbreaking absence of a man who had been a cornerstone of the community. His wife, Sarah, had always known that the job came with risks, but nothing could have prepared her for this. Lily, their 16-year-old daughter, couldn't process what had happened. Her father had been her hero, her protector, the one she always looked up to. Every day, she'd wait for him to come home, and they'd share their little moments together, whether it was a quick dinner, a joke, or a heart-to-heart chat about her day. Now, those moments had come to an abrupt and devastating end. She kept waiting for him to walk through the door, only to be greeted by the silence of the empty house. But the loss wasn't just emotional. It was also overwhelming in a way that Lily wasn't prepared for. There was a matter of practicalities. Bills were piling up, and with her mother still in shock, Lily found herself trying to keep the household together. Her father's salary had always been their main source of income, and without it, they were facing a future that seemed uncertain and bleak. There was one thing, however, that kept Lily going, a single thread that she clung to as a reminder of her father's presence. Max. Max wasn't just a dog to Lily, he was family. Max had been her father's canine partner for years, the two of them working together on dangerous assignments, looking out for one another in the most challenging situations. Lily grew up with Max, watched him and her father go through thick and thin, always with an unspoken bond of trust and respect. Max was part of the family, a living extension of her father's legacy. Losing him was almost as unbearable as losing James himself. But Lily didn't realize that this could become a reality. After her father's death, she learned that Max, who had been retired from active duty, was going to be put up for auction by the police department. It wasn't unusual for retired canines to be sold when they no longer served in the force, but to Lily, it felt like a final blow. She couldn't imagine anyone else taking Max. He belonged with them. He belonged with her. Her mother, overwhelmed with grief, didn't know what to do. She didn't understand the full weight of what was happening, too caught up in her own sorrow to notice Lily's growing distress. But Lily couldn't ignore it. She had to save Max. She couldn't let him go to someone who might not understand the bond he had shared with her father. She made up her mind then, no matter what it took, she would bring Max home. Lily had always been fascinated by the unspoken connection between her father and Max. There was something deeply powerful about the way the two communicated without words, an understanding that went beyond commands or training. To anyone who saw them working together, it was clear that James and Max were more than just officer and canine. They were partners in the truest sense of the word. James had brought Max home from the police academy when Lily was just a little girl. She remembered how excited her father had been, grinning from ear to ear as he introduced Max to their family. Max was a large German shepherd, his fur gleaming in the sunlight, his eyes sharp with alertness. At first, Lily had been intimidated by the dog's size and intensity, but it didn't take long for her to realize that Max was as much a part of the family as anyone else. He had a calm and protective nature, and he quickly grew fond of Lily, always watching over her whenever she played in the yard or took long walks with her father. As Lily grew older, she began to see more of the subtle ways in which her father and Max interacted. She'd watch them at the breakfast table, and Max would sit beside her father, his eyes never leaving him, waiting for any sign that a command was coming. But more often than not, it was James who would glance over at Max, giving him a small nod or a quiet word of reassurance. It was clear to Lily that James trusted Max with his life, and Max, in return, would have done anything to protect him. The bond between them was forged in the field, through hours of training, patrols, and countless dangerous situations. Max had been with James through it all. There was the time they had cornered a suspect in a dark alley, and James had been pinned down, unable to reach his radio. Max, sensing his handler's distress, had lunged at the suspect, protecting James from harm. Another time, when a fire broke out in a building they were investigating, Max had led James to safety when smoke and flames overwhelmed the area. These were the moments Lily never forgot, the memories of how fiercely loyal and brave Max had been. The kind of loyalty that went beyond just following commands. It was a bond that formed from a deep, mutual respect and a shared history. James had always said that Max wasn't just a partner, he was family. And to Lily, that couldn't have been more true. Max's presence in their lives was a constant reminder of her father's courage and selflessness. She often caught herself watching Max, seeing traces of her father in the way the dog moved, the way he sat by the door waiting for James to come home. The love and devotion between them seemed eternal, a bond no one could break. And now, as the reality of her father's death settled in, Lily couldn't bear the thought of losing Max too. He was the last piece of her father's legacy. The idea of some stranger taking him away, of Max being separated from the family he had fought so hard to protect, felt unbearable. The love she had for Max was as fierce as the bond her father had shared with him. She wouldn't let go of him, not without a fight. It wasn't until Lily's mother, Sarah, sat down with her one evening to explain the next steps that Lily fully understood the gravity of the situation. They had been so focused on the overwhelming pain of losing James that they hadn't even considered what would happen to Max. Sarah, still grieving, had learned from the police department that retired canines like Max were typically auctioned off to new owners. The department's reasoning was practical. Retired canines were no longer in service, and they didn't have the budget to care for them once they had aged out of active duty. It was a standard procedure, and Max was no exception. The department had sent a notice to the Walker family, informing them that Max would be going up for auction in just a few days. Lily's heart sank. She could barely process the information. Max, the dog who had been by her father's side for so many years, was now a commodity to be sold to the highest bidder. It felt wrong. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a living testament to her father's legacy. The idea of someone else taking him felt like another cruel twist of fate. Lily immediately knew what she had to do. She had to bring Max home. There was no way she could let him go, no matter what it took. But that's when the harsh reality set in. She didn't have the money to buy him back. The family had never been wealthy, and now, with her father's income gone, they were struggling to make ends meet. Lily's heart ached as she thought about how much Max meant to her father. The idea of him being sold to someone else who might not understand his value made her stomach turn. The more Lily thought about it, the more determined she became. She wouldn't let Max slip away. She couldn't imagine a world where Max wasn't part of their family. After all, he had been a constant presence in their home. Max had comforted her during sleepless nights when she was younger, and now he was the only piece of her father she had left. Losing him, too, would feel like losing her father all over again. Lily began researching how she could get the money to bid on Max. She knew it wouldn't be easy. The auction was public, and there would be others bidding for the canine. Some would want Max for working purposes, while others might just be looking for a dog. But none of them understood the depth of the bond between Max and her father. None of them would understand how important it was to Lily to keep Max by her side. Determined not to let him slip through her fingers, Lily took action. She started asking around, trying to figure out if there were any grants or funds that could help her purchase Max. She even reached out to family members, but the financial situation was dire. Sarah, too, wanted to help, but the truth was that they were barely scraping by. Lily knew it was a long shot, but she refused to give up. She began brainstorming other ways to raise the money, knowing that time was running out. Each passing day felt like a countdown to the auction, and Lily couldn't stand the thought of waiting until the last moment. She had to do something. Anything. To bring Max home. Lily didn't waste any time. The moment she heard about the auction, she began brainstorming every possible way to raise the money to buy Max. She spent the following days scouring the internet for grants that could help her bring him back, researching canine-related charities, and reading up on how other people had raised funds for similar causes. She even looked into setting up a crowdfunding campaign, convinced that there were others out there who would understand her desperation and support her mission. But reality was setting in quickly. As she explored every avenue, Lily was faced with obstacles at every turn. Most grants or charitable funds were either unavailable to individuals or required complicated paperwork and proof of need. It wasn't the answer she was hoping for. The crowdfunding site she set up had a small amount of initial support from her friends and family, but it wasn't enough. It felt like the whole world was closing in on her. Max was slipping further away, and she couldn't do anything to stop it. Despite the setbacks, Lily refused to give up. Every time she looked at Max's picture, the old memories flooded her mind. She thought of the times Max had been there for her during her darkest moments. When she was 12 and went through a difficult breakup with her best friend, it was Max who sat by her side, as if sensing her pain. He wasn't just a protector of her father, he was a protector of their whole family. And now, after losing her father, Lily couldn't imagine her life without Max by her side. In a desperate attempt, Lily started selling anything she could find around the house that held any potential value. Old electronics, her father's retired uniform, even childhood toys. It wasn't much, but she was determined to make it work. She figured that if she could raise even a fraction of the total cost, maybe she could scrape together the rest with the help of people who cared about her father's legacy. But as the days passed, the amount she raised still seemed far too little to make a dent in the total price she would need to pay at the auction. Her frustration reached a boiling point one afternoon when she found herself standing in the living room, staring at the family photo wall. Each picture reminded her of happier times, times when her father was alive, when everything seemed more stable. She looked over at Max, lying peacefully on the couch, his head resting on his paws, and the tears began to flow. The thought of losing him, of him being sold to someone who wouldn't understand the history they shared, was too much to bear. She felt a sense of hopelessness wash over her, but as soon as she wiped her tears, a new thought sparked in her mind. Maybe she didn't have to do this alone. There were people who loved her father, people who had seen firsthand the incredible work he did as an officer. Maybe they would help. With renewed determination, Lily made a list of all the people she could reach out to, old friends of her father, fellow officers who had worked with him, and even some of the people her father had helped over the years. If she could gather enough support, maybe the auction wouldn't be the end of Max's story. Time was running out, but Lily wasn't about to give up. Max wasn't just a dog to her. He was a link to her father, and she would fight for that connection no matter what. As the auction day approached, Lily's sense of urgency grew. Every passing hour felt like another step closer to the moment when Max could be taken from her forever. She barely slept at night, consumed by a whirlwind of thoughts about the auction, the money, and the looming possibility of losing the last tangible connection to her father. Even though she had made some progress in raising funds, it still felt like a drop in the ocean compared to the amount she needed. She contacted her father's old colleagues, officers who had worked with him, both in the department and in the community, and the response was heartwarming. They'd all expressed their condolences, but not all had the financial means to help. Some had offered their support in other ways, helping to spread the word, sharing her crowdfunding campaign with their networks. But Lily knew that wasn't enough. The goal was always the same, to win Max back. Lily spent hours poring over the auction details, learning everything she could about the process. The K9 auction was public, which meant there would be several bidders, some from outside the police force, who were simply looking for a dog with training. But no one else would have the personal connection to Max that she did. She had been part of his life since he was just a young pup, and together, she and Max had witnessed the ups and downs of her father's career. To Lily, it wasn't just about money. It was about keeping her father's legacy alive. She couldn't bear the thought of someone taking him away and not knowing how special he truly was. The closer the auction got, the more pressure weighed on Lily's shoulders. She felt as though she was holding her breath, each moment building to a breaking point. Her stomach churned with nervousness, and her heart raced at the thought of the auction room, the gavel coming down, and the finality of the moment. Her mind would replay scenarios, imagining the worst. Max being sold to someone who didn't understand the bond between a handler and his dog, or worse, Max being taken far away, never to be seen again. Her mother, Sarah, could see how badly Lily was struggling. Sarah had never fully grasped the depth of the bond between Lily and Max. She hadn't seen the countless hours the two of them had spent together, nor had she witnessed how Max had become a second father figure to her. Sarah was dealing with her own grief. Losing James had left a hole in her heart that felt like it would never heal. But she knew how important Max was to Lily. She could see the determination in her daughter's eyes, even though she didn't want to admit it out loud. One evening, as Lily was going over the auction details one more time, her mother sat beside her and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know how much Max means to you, Lily," she said softly. "I know you're doing everything you can, but don't forget that we've already lost so much." Lily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I just need to try, Mom. I can't lose him too." The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with unspoken emotion. Sarah gave her a small, understanding smile. "I know you can't. You're stronger than you think." The night before the auction, Lily couldn't sleep at all. She stared at the ceiling, mentally going over her plan one last time. Tomorrow was the day when everything would either fall apart or Max would come home. There was no turning back. The pressure was unbearable, but Lily knew she couldn't give up now. The morning of the auction arrived with a cold, gray sky that seemed to reflect the heaviness in Lily's chest. It felt like the world was holding its breath alongside her. She had barely slept, her mind consumed with the thought of the auction, the pressure of the bids, and the fear of losing Max. But there was no time for doubt now. Today was the day, and it was too late to back out. Lily and her mother drove to the auction house. The silence in the car broken only by the occasional hum of the engine and the soft shuffle of papers in Lily's hands as she reviewed her notes one more time. The drive felt longer than usual, every second dragging, the anticipation growing with each passing mile. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, but her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, a sign of her own anxiety. When they arrived, Lily was struck by how ordinary the auction house appeared. The building was large, with a simple sign out front that read Public K9 Auction. She had imagined it differently, maybe something more dramatic, more in line with the life or death importance she felt in her gut. Instead, the auction house was filled with a crowd of people going about their business, talking among themselves in low voices, preparing for the event to begin. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she walked through the doors, her stomach flipping with every step. She couldn't focus on the noise around her. The chatter of other bidders, the clinking of glasses as people sipped coffee, the occasional bark from another K9. All she could think about was Max. Somewhere in that building, he was waiting, likely unaware that his fate was being decided today. She glanced around at the other people in the room. Some of them looked like serious bidders, others like casual observers. But none of them mattered to Lily. All that mattered was Max. She spotted him in the back, sitting quietly in his cage, his eyes scanning the room, his posture still alert. Even in the unfamiliar setting, he looked strong and dignified, as though he was waiting for his handler, for James, to come back. Lily's heart ached at the sight. Max hadn't deserved this. He didn't deserve to be put up for sale like any other commodity. He was a hero, a symbol of bravery and loyalty, and Lily couldn't bear the thought of him being sent to anyone who didn't understand that. The auction began, and the sound of the gavel striking the podium echoed through the room. Lily's palms were sweaty as she waited for Max's turn to arrive. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her pulse quickening with each passing second. She had set aside a small amount of money to bid with, but it wasn't nearly enough. She was counting on the kindness of others, hoping that someone would be moved by her story, by the bond she shared with Max. Then, the moment she had been dreading arrived. The auctioneer's voice rang out as he called Max's name. Lot number 6, K9 Max, retired police dog, trained in search and apprehension. Lily's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment that would change everything. The bidding began almost immediately. A couple of hands shot up, signaling offers. Lily felt the tension in her chest tighten as each bid came in higher than the last. She raised her hand tentatively, trying to control the trembling in her fingers. Each time she did, she felt like she was putting everything on the line, hoping for a miracle. The numbers climbed, and Lily's anxiety reached its peak. The auctioneer's voice continued to call out the bids, but all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. Max was slipping further and further away, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep up. Then, as the price reached a point where Lily thought she would lose, something unexpected happened. The bid soared higher, and Lily's anxiety grew with each number called out. Her hand was trembling as she raised it once again, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, 1,000. It wasn't much, but it was all she had left in her. She had counted every penny she had scraped together from selling items around the house, the small donations from family, and the meager contributions from her crowdfunding campaign. She felt like she was playing a losing game, but she wasn't ready to give up. The auctioneer nodded, acknowledging her bid, but another hand shot up and the price continued to climb. Her heart sank. She could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that with each passing second, the chance to bring Max home was slipping further away. She was running out of time and options. As the bids reached $1,500, Lily's breath caught in her throat. It felt like everything she had been fighting for was about to be taken away from her, like she was about to lose not just a dog, but the last connection she had to her father. The idea of some stranger walking away with Max, of him being taken far away from the only home he ever known, was unbearable. Just as the auctioneer raised his gavel and called for a final offer, a voice rang out across the room, strong and clear. $2,000, the voice said, firm and commanding. Lily's eyes snapped to the source of the bid, and for the first time in what felt like hours, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. Standing in the back of the room, his arms crossed and a determined look on his face, was Officer Davis, one of her father's old colleagues, a man who had worked alongside James for years. She hadn't expected to see him here, but there he was, offering to help in a way Lily had never imagined. Officer Davis had always been there for her father, both as a colleague and a friend. He had been one of the people who had supported their family after James passed, but Lily had never dreamed he would be involved in the auction. As the gavel fell and the room quieted, she saw Davis approach the front, his gaze locked onto hers. "I'm sorry I couldn't help sooner," Officer Davis said, his voice gruff with emotion. "But Max belongs with you, Lily. He always has." Lily's eyes filled with tears, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude. She had no words, just the realization that this man, this hero in his own right, had come to her rescue at the most critical moment. Officer Davis had stepped in not just for her father, but for her. He understood the bond she shared with Max, and in that moment, he had made the impossible possible. Max, who had been standing calmly at the back of the room, his ears perked up as if he recognized the voice, suddenly turned his head and locked eyes with Lily. His tail gave a small wag, and for the first time in hours, Lily allowed herself to smile. He was coming home. Officer Davis made his way toward her, handing her a check for the winning bid. "You're not alone in this, Lily. Your father meant a lot to all of us, and we'll make sure Max stays where he belongs." Lily could hardly contain the emotions that flooded through her. The overwhelming sense of relief, mixed with the sadness of her loss, was too much to bear. But as she reached out to hug Officer Davis, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. Max would be safe. He would be with her. And in that moment, she knew that no matter how many challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As Officer Davis handed over the check and Max was officially claimed, Lily felt as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. The room seemed to fade away as she focused solely on Max, who was now standing in front of her, tail wagging, eyes bright with recognition. Her heart swelled with gratitude, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope. The auction was over, but it wasn't the end of her journey, it was just the beginning. As she reached out to touch Max's head, he nuzzled her gently, his warm fur providing a comfort she hadn't realized she was missing. The bond between them was undeniable, forged over years of shared experiences, and now it was stronger than ever. Lily looked up at Officer Davis, who gave her a small, reassuring smile. "Max will be taken care of, Lily," he said softly. "He's home now, with the family who truly understands him." Tears welled in Lily's eyes as she whispered, "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." You don't have to say anything, Davis replied. Your father would be proud of you. Max, too. Lily nodded, the lump in her throat making it hard to speak. But the words didn't matter. She had her father's legacy, and she had Max, the dog who had been there through it all, who had protected and loved her father, and who would continue to do so for her. As they left the auction house, Max walked proudly beside Lily, his head held high, as though he knew he had been saved from an uncertain future. The sun had broken through the clouds as they stepped outside, casting a soft golden light over everything. Lily couldn't help but feel that it was a sign that things were finally starting to come together. When they got home, Lily took Max straight to the backyard, where they had spent so many moments together in the past. Max trotted around, sniffing the grass, and Lily watched him with a sense of peace she hadn't known since her father passed. It was as if, in bringing Max home, she was also bringing back a piece of her father's love and protection. Her mother, Sarah, was waiting inside, her face lighting up when she saw Max. You did it, Sarah said, her voice trembling with emotion. I knew you would. Lily smiled through her tears. I didn't do it alone. It took all of us. Together, they sat in the living room, Max lying contentedly at their feet. The house felt full again, the absence of her father still there, but somehow more bearable now that Max was back where he belonged. The days that followed were filled with small moments of healing, long walks with Max, visits from family and friends, and quiet evenings where Lily would sit on the porch with him, just like she used to with her father. The pain of losing her dad would never completely fade, but in having Max by her side, Lily found strength. She knew that her father's spirit lived on in the dog who had protected him, and now that same spirit would continue to watch over their family. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a living memory of her father, a reminder that even in the darkest times, love and loyalty could still shine through. And as the days turned into weeks and then months, Lily knew that no matter what life threw their way, she and Max would face it together, just as her father would have wanted.